Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Human Rights Campaign, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 20,055 people from 140 countries and is supported by 377 organisations. This week on Feminist Question Time, we have Daša, Stevović from Serbia, we have Taekyung from South Korea, we have Dr. Catherine Lynch from Australia, and Denise McKenna. Daša Stevović from Serbia, and she's the new Women's Human Rights Campaign country contact in Serbia. She's going to give us an update on what's happening in Serbia. So welcome, Daša, and over to you.
I'm going to start by introducing myself and the organizations that I'm a member of here in Serbia. And then I will try to go over the situation here in Serbia concerning gender identity ideology. I know that there have already been several people from Serbia speaking on WHRC panels, but I will repeat probably most of the things that those people said. There are no big new things happening here in Serbia, but there are some things that I should go over regarding gender identity in laws and government strategies. First, I will shortly introduce myself. I'm a member of a radical feminist organization called Fem Revolt. This was for years, it operated as a nonprofit group, started in Croatia, but since recently it has it's just now registered as an organization, and it had developed further into a network of radical feminists, not only in Croatia, but in all the Serbo-Croatian speaking area, which is here in the Balkans. For example, also another contact person for Croatia is also another member, a president of Fem Revolt. It's Ksenia Kordić. She was here on the panels, I think, several times. Also, I am one of the founding members of an LGBT organization called Lesbian and Gay Solidarity Network. It's shortly LGSM in Serbian. And this organization has just celebrated its first birthday. We were founded in September 2020. We went to Pride a week ago, so I'll talk about that a bit later. That was fun. All right, so concerning the situation in Serbia, I don't think, in comparison to most of the Western countries, I don't think Serbia is yet in the type of problem that you are facing in, for example, UK or USA. But what I think is happening is that gender identity as a term has entered Serbian laws, and we are now in this weird situation between actually implementing those things, which are still not as misused as they can be and as they will be at some point in the future. There is gender identity is a phrase that is present in several laws. For example, gender equality law and anti-discrimination law. The phrase is not properly defined in either of those laws. And it's at some point, it is in direct contradiction with some other formulations in those same laws. For example, there are some protections that are women being granted on the basis of sex, and the fact that gender identity is mentioned in those same phrases in the law is directly contradicting within the same law. The phrase gender identity is not defined anywhere, not even in those sections of the law that are intended for explanation of the terms that the laws are using. And also, it's noticeable that in those laws, it's evidently not, even the people who were writing the laws are not exactly sure what they were doing with it, because you can see that they're using gender identity, and sometimes even sex interchangeably. And on a lot of places, you can just see the formulation gender or gender identity, which obviously means nothing. But I don't think Serbia is yet at a place where those phrases and those laws are actually being misused as much as they can, and as much as they will be. This is, for now, this is just a Trojan horse, and it's just preparing the situation for further violations of the rights of women that can happen because of these laws. Currently, there is a public debate around the proposition for same-sex partnerships, because Serbia still doesn't have legally regulated same-sex partnership laws. This is also problematic because not only that the law also mentions the phrase gender identity, in the sense that the law protects the gender identity of both partners, which is supposed to probably mean the fact that both partners are of the same sex. But also the proposition of the law does not define homosexuality in any way. It does define it as a private matter and as like a different sexuality, which means nothing, because at some point that can be used to mean anything. Anything can be a different sexual orientation if you do not define homosexuality. Right now, because since the Pride happened a week ago, a minister of human rights and minority rights has mentioned that as soon as this law passes, and that is supposed to happen very soon, the government will move to consider gender identity law, which was proposed to the government 2017, I think, I'm not entirely sure, by a liberal democratic party. Nothing happened with the law at that point. It wasn't even on a public debate, but it exists somewhere. It was proposed to the government. That law is also, it's nothing new. It does introduce gender identity to the legislative, but we'll already have it in other laws. But at some point, that proposition will also come to the attention of the government and the public debate. As soon as same-sex partnerships are done, and I think that's how it usually works in other countries as well. You pass the same-sex partnership law, and then all the activist forces in LGBT organizations just move to the laws concerning gender identity. Here in Serbia, this is my personal opinion, is that feminist organizations are still not as involved in the debate yet. Most of them, because the topic has just not reached them yet. We do not have strong feminist organizations that are fighting for trans ideology, except maybe for Center for Women's Studies. However, the biggest problem in this sense is LGBT organizations, which have stopped fighting for homosexuals entirely and are now pushing trans and queer agenda for the last several years, but for the last 2 years, very, very strongly. I'm not considering the LGBT organizations. This is a specific situation that Serbia is in, and it's even slightly ironic. We still haven't, for example, here in this part in Balkans. I'm not sure about the other neighboring Balkan countries. I'll check, but here in Balkans, we have it in law. We have gender identity in laws. We don't have same-sex partnerships. We have old homophobia, and old forms of misogyny are still very, very live and kicking. And we're also expected to fight these new forms of homophobia that are actually being pushed by the LGBT organizations on Pride in all of their programs and everyday activism. That's, I think, also, this is not to be forgotten. Serbia is a country that has a very, very strong surgical industry. There are a lot of there is the surgeon that does sex change surgeries, and very, very famous. And a lot of people from all around the world are actually coming to Serbia in order to change sex. And also the government does pay, not for all of it, but the government does provide for most of the money for the surgery for people here is mostly covered by the state. I'd like to briefly say what happened to Pride, but can you just tell me how much more time do I have so I don't get carried away?
You've got 10 minutes of time, so that's great. And I also wanted to ask the question, what made you realize transgender ideology was a threat? But maybe if you get time to say that, that'd be great.
Sure, it's a very, very short answer. I'm a lesbian, so I saw what LGBT circles here in Belgrade look like, which is very, I mean, at some point it became funny. We have like trans activists here started pushing it in 2018. It was a big debate within leftist spaces because I'm also a socialist. At some point overnight, it became this very, very big debate. Everybody was involved in it. People made lists of TERFs. I had no idea I was a TERF until I got on one of those lists. I just wrote a tweet. It was a whole shit show. Sorry. Anyway, I mean, I started reading about it at that point a couple of years ago, but nobody I didn't expect it for it to blow up overnight in Serbia, where we're still fighting homophobic violence on streets, literally. Which actually brings me to Pride that happened a week ago. As I mentioned, I'm a member of a Lesbian and Gay Solidarity Network. We started. We agreed that we at some point we agreed that we do want to go to Pride, even though we are not entirely welcome there, and we were told that we're not. But gender identity issues are not the only problem with the organizers of Pride. They're not working on behalf of homosexuals. They're not representing homosexuals for a while now. Pride is not what Pride is supposed to be here in Belgrade. It's just a party in the middle of the city with a lot of police. A lot of homosexuals do not feel represented by Pride for many reasons. But at some point, obviously, queer ideology kicked in. There is not a single lesbian in the organization of Pride. And it's male crew organizing a party once a year. That's it. So we decided that we do want to go to Pride in our own block, and we decided that we will go if there is enough people so that we are safe. There were 19 of us, which I think was very good for our first try. We went and we had our own slogans, and at some point there were several situations that happened. At first, we had a crash with the police because Pride is a highly guarded event here in Belgrade. You cannot reach Pride. You have to go through several cordons of police in order to get to Pride, and the government is claiming it's a safe event. Why do we have that much police then if the government can provide a safe Pride? and also, if government officials are welcome guests at Pride, who are we protesting against? Who are we? What does the Pride want? What are the demands? What are the principles that it stands on? We have no idea anymore in Belgrade. So after the police asked us for our IDs and everything, it was a whole situation. They were threatening to take us to the police station. And later, when we actually managed to get to the Pride gate, we had our first incident where one of the slogans, the transparents, was taken away from us. A friend from the French group Résistance Lesbienne was there with us. She has more experience in crashing prides with Get the L Out and obviously the French group, and she had a slogan that said trans ideology erases lesbians, and of course that was immediately taken away from us. We could enter the Pride, but without that one. We managed to get lesbian not queer in. That's something. The organizers could not explain why we're not allowed to take that one in. And inside of the Pride, the funniest thing that happened is that obviously the organizers have sent private security to try to kick us out or take away our slogans. They didn't manage. And then they sent their own personal volunteers who were securing the Pride to block all of our slogans during the walk, which is when you understand what happened, it's really funny, because on Pride, some people, most of them even straight, were blocking our slogan that said proudly homosexual, which is, it does explain all it does in a brief episode explain what Belgrade Pride has become. If you are blocking, if straight couples are blocking slogans that say proudly homosexual or against conversion therapies, we had a slogan that said against conversion therapies. They had a giant problem with that, which is really funny. You know where Belgrade Pride stands, and it's not on the side of homosexuals, and it's not on the side of women. It's on the side of queer theory and profit that comes with the dominant ideology that is gender identity ideology in this case. I think I've managed to cover everything. If you have any other questions, if I have time, please let me know.
So I have one question, and then and then we can have more questions at the end. My question is that when Olga came on about a year ago from Serbia, she told us that there was some of the left-wing organizations, the old communist sort of materialist Marxists, who were supportive of women's sex-based rights because they believe in materialism. And we have quite a few Serbian left-wing organizations having signed the declaration. They're pretty much the only political parties or political groups. And do you know any of them, or do you know where they are? Are they sticking to their materialist guns at the moment?
Okay, yeah, we are lucky that a lot of we do not have a official. It's an activist type of left wing, and left wing is not strong here in the political sense. But I think that we do have a strong organizations in that sense. And yes, we are lucky that an important part of left wing here in Serbia hadn't forgotten on their Marxist materialistic stance in this debate. Also, the same goes for feminist organizations. I think I don't know how to explain you shortly how that happened, but there is support still from the left and the older feminist organizations. A lot of things have happened there, and people have switched, organizations have broken. But yes, you are right, and what Olga said is true. For example, right now, on a camp, one socialist organization called the Workers' Voice, one feminist, this radical feminist organization, Fem Revolt, and anti-fascist choir, Our Song. We are holding a camp. And this morning I held a discussion on Declaration for Women's Sex-Based Rights and this campaign, WHRC, and we spoke about gender identity laws, surrogacy, Nordic model, and so on.
We're going to now move on to Taekyung from South Korea, and she's going to talk to us about the power of female universities as a women-only place, a place only for women. Taekyung is a radical feminist and student. She belongs to Women's Human Rights Campaign South Korea. She did volunteer work for anti-digital sexual abuse, and she introduces the radical feminism and the lesbianism of South Korea to the world. So welcome, Taekyung, and over to you.
I joined today's session for introducing the ability of women's universities as a place only for women in the rise of radical feminism in South Korea. I guess today participants are already familiar with the phase of radical feminism movement in Korea. The movement, especially around 20s, young women, such as boycotting men or men's bodies, or escape the corset movement. In the context, corset means all stuff that sexualize a woman's body, and revealing these sexual crimes to the public issue. Obviously, some online communities like Megalia or Roma did play a major role in the movement. Also, as a physical place, women's universities have done something very meaningful, and today I'm going to talk about those briefly. By the way, the concept of educational institutions only for single sex is literally rampant in Korea. There are lots of middle schools and high schools only for girls or only for boys, and there are universities and colleges only for women. The historical reason for it is not important today. The main point is that about 800,000 girls get educated and spend their daily life free from boys every year, and more than 600,000 women are currently attending institutions of higher education only for women. I had also entered girls' high school, and now I'm entering women's university. Even though each country has differences, I prepared this presentation to show the possible things that can be happened or that can be done when young women collectively occupy their own spaces. It would not be difficult to imagine the role of universities in protest wave when we see it in our great and small history. Young, vigorous, and ambitious students always want a better tomorrow than today and feel thirsty for breaking bad habits for their benefits. That is natural. Historically, the students attending women's universities in Korea perceive and resist male violence against women. And 2016 is the year when the necessity of radical feminism in daily life within young women arose on the internet. Subsequently, female universities also took the role as spaces for debate to take the movement further. The discussion and utilization of feminism and lesbianism varies slightly between each university, and I will talk about this mainly based on my school, Seongshin Women's University. At first, it was very urgent to protect our place from men's invasion. It might be easy to imagine the reason. Men are always willing to visit female unis, and they have a voyeuristic interest in watching young women's bodies and enjoy the situation when they get a lot of look from young women. And there were guidelines and rules for safety made by the institutes. As an example, the male visitors can enter only the first floor or the square of the campus, but it is practically not enough to protect the space from the potential crimes of men. So the students made some rules themselves at first, and they had reached agreements with security of the unis, local police station, and a district office. The first rules, it is just a settlement between students. So invite male acquaintances, male family members, or male partners like boyfriend or husband, only with a reasonable and rational reason, such as moving heavy luggage or celebrating graduation. The second one is once a month or upon request, local police and district office staffs must inspect women's toilet in the university to check if any male visitors or male staffs or male faculties have installed spy cameras in the toilet. If you have heard about spy cameras crimes in South Korea, it is also easy to understand why. And the last one, like sleeping rooms and students' unions buildings, some spaces that require particularly weighted protection from potential threats from men, do not allow men's interests without security. Even male professors and male exchange students are not allowed to enter. Because of men's threats and their crimes in the past among the students, the negative perception of men's invasion into female colleges has been firmly established. There was an issue between 2019 winter to 2020 spring. One transgender student who got sex change surgery to get female body passed a women's university. Thankfully, because of well aware about the unsafeness and dangerousness, students were able to voice their opposition to the first case of a transgender being admitted to their university. Afterwards, the student voluntarily withdrew his application, but the whole students who speak opposition at the university were strongly demonized by gender identity adherents. But if we view this as a successful defense against men's intrusion into space for women, there is no need to be discouraged. Agendas of radical feminism and lesbianism among the students settled to normal value is the main feature of women's universities in Korea, and clubs have enabled this result. In the year of 2018, there were only radical feminism clubs with a few people, and their action became the beginning point that the ideas of radical feminism and lesbianism were spread to other students. They constantly showed the life of a woman without corset, all stuff that sexualized women's body, like long hair or makeup or dress high heels or weight loss without healthy reason, like that, and show the value of solidarity with other women, like attending protests together, and shared their articles and installed public advertisements against the problematic male-dominated society. Since then, small feminist clubs have emerged within certain faculties. They study misogyny issues in society related to their major and share the results with other students. For example, the Feminism Club of Department of Law studies and shares how incompetent the Korean judiciary is in protecting female victims. In the case of the Department of Nursing, it strongly condemns the image of sexually objectified nurses and corrects for sexual knowledge. Also, that it provides the necessary information about menstrual cramps, like that, to other students. Currently, most clubs and academic societies in the female universities that focus on various goals have started operating with the concept of radical feminism. With various purposes, they are centered on women's solidarity and focus on the discovery and growth of women's identity, even if the club's name doesn't include feminism, such as students' councils or football club or esports club, like that. Personally, these are the most interesting things that I brought for today. As I said earlier, various clubs help to let us know how we can utilize radical feminism in various sections of studies or of societies. But without the constraints of time and space, students executive or student-only application connect their life with the radical feminism easily. So this application named Every Time. So every university in Korea has their own community platform in this application, and the platform can only be used by current enrolled students and graduates on one university. So in the case of female colleges or female universities, all users are women. So despite using online, it has the benefit that students can share their private information or important or big or small information free from men's interference. Until now, many discussions and solidarity have been achieved through this means of communication, through these apps, and it has been possible to raise up the agendas of radical feminism to normalcy. However, there were many conflicts between students before this became possible. At first, the rules were strongly settled, which must not be posted on this app, especially about male partners like boyfriend or husband, or makeup, or like about the corsets. And at the moment, like early 2018, the majority of students that called themselves liberal feminists, they thought sexual liberation is liberating, and smoky makeup with skin pure outfits appeared to depict confident and powerful, strong women. So in the beginning, there was a long conflict between students, and it took almost a year to get their agreement. For gaining their agreement, the strategies were quite childish and earthy. Mainly, they were ridiculed about Korean men, like such as their average penis length, or their ugly face, or their nefarious personalities. So with the generalizations of the images of Korean men, the idolized male's body and ability of boyfriends have totally collapsed. And students got used to the disgusting, weak, and negative image of men. And also the students got used to the life without men. The second one was continuous exposure, the form of the women's life with radical feminism. So the feminist students choose the strategies displaying students' pictures breaking away decorative labor. Decorative labor means spending time, money, and their health for decorating themselves. And they displaying various achievements for studies, workout, and career, for giving motivation to other friends or other students. And also they displaying the various forms of love that women can exchange with each other, more beyond the sexuality. So with those strategies, excessive makeup or excessive dress up of women has become very awkward, at least in the campus. Also, students began to think that they were no longer the weak one, but merely victims of systemic discrimination. What this change means is that their conviction that their achievements must be possible leads them out of helplessness and develops their self-esteem. Finally, they become collectively convinced that they no longer need to love men. This shift in thinking of young women who choose to bond with women rather than men is, in other words, the natural acceptance of lesbianism in their daily life. In this context, the most of Korean young students or young women thought lesbianism as a kind of relationship between women and other women with deep solidarity. So after going through those previous steps or process, now there is a movement making community platforms sharing economic and residential information for women who have decided not to get married. I have no idea how welfare policies for unmarried women are prepared in other countries, but Korea still so lacks welfare places for single-person households. So this attempt is more meaningful. Other than that, the attempt we are most focused on is to be reborn as a political being. I interpreted becoming a political being as becoming a subject that can share practical and strategic solidarity for women outside of school or outside of college, and becoming a subject that enable young women's voices to influence society and politics. As an example of this, recently one student reported by email to various foreign media about the phenomenon of mass bullying by the Korean male public towards female archers with her short hair at the Tokyo Olympics. And it was reported like this. And another movement is to encourage other students to comment on articles pointing out that they were mostly written by men and proportion of female comments was always low. As this has only just begun, it is not yet known what results of such an attempt will be. However, it is expected myself that this will also be a spark for meaningful change. It is the end of today's presentation, and I hope I can share the meaningful results and other perceptions like criticism between radical feminist students like today. So thank you for listening.
We're now going to hear from Dr. Catherine Lynch. She's in Australia and from Australia. She's going to talk about the voice of the child as commodity in adoption and surrogacy. Dr. Lynch is a lawyer. She's vice president of Adoptee Rights Australia, Inc., and founding member of Abolish Surrogacy Australia. She's proud to be part of a global community of adoptee activists, and her lived experience informs her activist work to abolish the child commodification intrinsic to adoption and its successor, surrogacy.
I'm going to speak about how surrogacy is in a similar category to adoption in terms of the damage it causes to women and children and its violation of human rights of children as enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Adopted people around the world have testified to lifelong damage caused to them just by the mere fact of being permanently separated from their mothers at or near to their birth. They also testified to a secondary compounding trauma of being forced to live apart from all of their kin, and this legal severance is symbolised in the replacement of their birth certificates. So I'll just show you, this is my birth certificate here. And it has my name on it and the name of my mother who gave birth to me. And then I was issued an adoption order. So at this point, I have documents that reflect the truth of who I am and what was happening to me. But the very strange thing that happens in adoption is that what then happens is they go ahead and issue a second birth certificate. And this time your name is completely gone and you have a completely new name, first and last name, and a completely new mother who you didn't even know when you were born. So it's created as if you're born a second time. I mean, that's how I think about it. And it doesn't correspond in any way to the facts surrounding my birth. So in adoption, both your name and the name of your mother are secreted away in a government file. And this whole system was designed to hide the facts of what was then known as an illegitimate birth. That is, it was invented to deal with what was seen as the historical social problem of unmarried mothers and the burden and stigma of their illegitimate children. If you want to know more about the construction of the legitimacy-illegitimacy distinction and how it functioned historically to protect male property rights while facilitating male sexual entitlement, you might like to read Gail Reeke's book, Measuring Immorality, Social Inquiry and the Problem of Illegitimacy. So modern adoption is not an ancient practice, as lobbyists claim, but it was invented in the 20th century to solve this problem, the early 20th century, that had been debated in parliaments for hundreds of years. This new solution to illegitimacy was partly enabled by developments such as the mass production of baby bottles and the development of baby formula and other social developments that increased the ability, the chances of newborn babies to survive after birth without their mothers. Before these developments, it was considered that illegitimate children, so-called illegitimate children, could have a redemptive effect on their bad mothers. But afterwards, after the changes, social impacts, this notion was able to be reversed, and the mother was considered to be unfit to parent her own baby. And the baby was then rescued from her and placed in the home of married couples who were infertile or unable to conceive. So the pressure for married couples to have children at this time was likewise heightened by the rise of the nuclear family ideal. And if you want to read more about that, you can read the Anne Summers book, Damned Whores and God's Police. Finally, we know that the invention of adoption was also used as part of the creation of the stolen generations and the system of land theft, assimilation and genocide that so devastated Indigenous population of Australia and other colonised nations. So 20th century adoption was able to be produced by the patriarchy because of a particular socio-historical juncture of a number of narratives and coalescing purposes. So this new system of closed records adoption essentially reversed the common law that had always said, the English common law said you couldn't relinquish guardianship of your own children, and that was actually a crime. It was a crime of abandonment. But this new reversal became a booming demand-driven baby market in which women were, this is over the course of the 20th century, in which women were coerced, assaulted and forced to sign away their babies, and for which our Prime Minister at the time in 2013, Julia Gillard, has since offered a national apology. Similar forced adoption markets developed in Ireland, Scotland and the UK. So this is around the 50s, 60s, 70s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Canada, New Zealand as well, again, with the introduction of adoption laws and adoption acts in those countries. And some of these countries are currently conducting inquiries with a view to also offering national apologies. I think the UK, I know Scotland was really gearing up, and I think the UK has just announced there an official inquiry to that end. If you'd like to know more about the development of the adoption market in Australia, you can read The Market in Babies, Stories of Australian Adoption by Denise Cuthbert, Marion Courtley and Shirley Swain. Why we're still using this antiquated, racist, sexist 20th century institution in the 21st century, when we're well aware of its history and we no longer remove children solely because their mothers are unmarried, is a very interesting question, because as you know, adoption has not ended, it's certainly diminished and has been rebranded by government and lobbyists. The difficulty with rebranding, it's we're no longer taking children from unfit, unmarried mothers. It's we're saving them from the endless carousel of the foster care system. So it's being used, promoted now as like a child protection solution. The difficulty with this rebranding is that adoption in no way complies with child protection mandates, because it doesn't provide any welfare checks once children arrive in private adoptive homes, and it continues the changing of birth certificates and therefore kind of the erasure of mothers and the legal severance of the child's rights to their own families. So why has it been rebranded and kept alive as a system instead of being replaced by guardianship style care and other forms of care where you can care for children in a family environment, for example, without doing all this stuff to their identity and their legal rights and stuff? The answer is a complex combination of functions which all serve capitalist patriarchy, one of which is it props up the tolerance in the community for the next level up of legal child trade, if you like, which is intercountry adoption, and which can, intercountry adoption can and has been used in trade deals with foreign countries. So you can, you know, ask a country to open up their intercountry adopter market, or you won't, you know, do this or that trade deal, whatever. I certainly know the US has done that. And this in turn facilitates the third tier of legalised child trade, which is this new market in surrogacy, which like trans ideology is a huge long-term moneymaker for many, many people, like doctors, lawyers, social workers, psychologists. It's like a whole ecosystem of money, generating money, like adoption was in the forced adoption era. This third tier of child trade differs from the other two from adoption, because in surrogacy we intentionally create children to remove them from the mother and transport them, as opposed to them already being in the world and just vulnerable for being marked out for adoption pathways. Of course, this all feeds the same ideology and purpose as gender ideology. It's apparently US-based values system which attacks biological reality, controlling and exploiting women, erasing mothers, distracting from the real solutions to the world's problems of environmental destruction, extreme inequality and poverty under runaway capitalism. It's a value system in which everything is for sale, including children. I've even got quotes from the United States that it's sort of officially they can accept the sale of children if they're not exploited in the process. This is sort of the kind of words that they use. So lobbying for the continuance of intercountry adoptions, for example, despite scandal after scandal, which has closed down program after program from Ethiopia, from India, from Guatemala, only to reopen them again when scandal dies down, has been described by one whistleblower who worked for the European Parliament investigating the Romanian system. She described the lobbying as ferocious. So lobbying that is ferocious. Why are people so ferocious about keeping these systems going? Well, nearly a century of adoption scandals that are still occurring today. I think the most recent ones that have closed down is the intercountry adoption programs to Belgium and possibly the Netherlands. So these this whole system proves that the import and export of children for family formation cannot be adequately regulated and managed. It's still not working. We've had a lot of time to perfect it. It only facilitates illegal child trafficking and exploitation. And of course, the same can only happen with surrogacy. The problem with these systems is not only the trauma caused to people by severance from their mother at or near to birth from their kin, and often language, culture and country in the case of adoption, is that the child also essentially disappears into a private home, and whether the child is abused there is of nobody's concern. And of course, abuse occurs for many adopted children, and to this day this demographic of adoptees has less than zero voice whatsoever in society. I don't think they were excluded. This demographic of adoptees was excluded from the recent Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse because they weren't in institutions despite being placed by governments. So you probably don't know about this because nobody has wanted, nobody has wanted to know except adopted people. How much of this abuse goes on in adoption, we've got no idea because it's never reported or recorded that a victim of a domestic crime is adopted until very recently. So nobody actually researches it. And the Bureau of Statistics does not track adopted people in terms of rates of homelessness, incarceration and suicide. Adoption is not evidence-based in any sense of the word. And this is another lie that the lobbyists use all the time. So when it comes to surrogacy, it's very important to understand that a newborn baby does not know it may have been created from foreign DNA. So a newborn baby only knows and loves the woman that who she or he is born from because of the pre-existing embodied relationship of pregnancy. In this respect, a baby removed for surrogacy in infancy is no different from a baby removed for adoption, and the trauma is going to be the same. The baby feels, the baby feels that his or her life is endangered because on an evolutionary perspective, if the mother died off, the baby would usually follow. It will be frightened, cries, refuse food, has difficulty sleeping. The baby misses out on the body regulation with the mother's bodily systems, emotional regulation, temperature, heartbeat, and the baby calls for the mother and cries for the mother. And I just read another person online, my hospital records and someone else's hospital records recorded our behaviour after we were taken from our mothers. So some kindly nurse said, oh, screaming all night, So we know that babies suffer greatly when the mother is removed or fails to materialise after the huge event of birth. So to finish up this talk, I just want to mention quickly the international human rights law. The Convention on the Rights of the Child was originally based on a document called the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. In this initial document, the fundamental human right not to be separated from your mother was directly stated in Principle 6. By the time we get to the Convention, the word mother is replaced by the word parents. Maybe that was to include the father, but it just goes to show the erasure of mothers began a long time ago. And now today in surrogacy, your right to not be separated from your mother, as stated directly in Principle 6 and still protected by Article 9, is a right not to be separated from anyone in the whole world, unrelated strangers even. The child's mother is anybody, any woman, and now with trans ideology, the mother can be any man in the world, anyone who merely intends to parent. Abusers, pedophiles, and even murderers do intend to parent if it gets them a victim. So this is a human right specifically designed and applied to children, which has not just been encroached upon, but has been utterly obliterated, in my opinion, or certainly in the United States, because that's where the particular law has been introduced. I think it's in New York, where the gestational mother in surrogacy isn't even included on that original birth certificate. So how do you track her, especially if you're not related by DNA? So the child, she's vanished from the child's life and knowledge. So on top of this, surrogacy violates Articles 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 21 and 24, which is about half of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And like slavery, it's fundamentally unethical, immoral, and a violation of a plethora of women and children's rights, and it's cruel. So in conclusion, the adoption boom has ended as a boom outside of America, but what ensured it still lingers on outside of America, outside the US, was the creation of a private international law, the Hague Convention on Intercountry Adoption. So this same path is now being trodden by the same people who created that convention. They're the same people calling for a convention on the regulation of surrogacy. And when I say the same people, I mean literally the same people, the same organisations such as International Social Services and all the same self-professed child rights experts, exactly the same people, the same adoption lobbyists who were described as ferocious. It appears to be an amazing amount of power in such a concentrated group of private citizens to be able to create a Hague Convention and somehow through unfathomably well-funded lobbying have it become international law. So if they succeed in creating this Hague Convention and then in lobbying governments to sign up to it, we really must resign ourselves to living in this world where the buying and selling of babies and children and their import and export around the world is legal and therefore acceptable, just as it is already to some extent via adoption pathways. So any convention to regulate surrogacy must be prevented, and all surrogacy must be outlawed, not just outlawed, but prosecuted. So that's the end of my talk.